Hi, the title of today's lecture is Later Genus Homo. This is Anthropology 225. There are basically four main types of later Homo. We have Homo Antecessor, Homo Heidelbergensis, which is often known as archaic Homo sapiens, Homo Neanderthalensis, and Homo sapiens, which is also known as anatomically modern Homo sapiens. And what I'd like to do is go through each of these in succession. So, Homo Antecessor. Homo Antecessor dates from 1.2 to 0.8 million years ago. That's 800,000 years ago. And it's found in Spain, France, and England. It was originally discovered by Udald Carbonell and J.L. Arzuaga in 1994, and it's one of the earliest known hominins in Europe. A hominin is a member of the genus Homo. Some individuals have suggested that this fossil is the ancestor of Homo Heidelbergensis. So what can I tell you about the site? This type site, the site where the first antecessor fossils were found, is a site known as Atapuerca, Spain. It was in 1994, 1995, 80 fossils with an MNI, minimum number of individuals of 6 individuals, were found. There are 200 stone tools, 300 animal bones. They found a stone carved knife with the hominid remains. And all of these remains were dated to approximately 780,000 years ago. At this site, there were numerous examples of cut marks where flesh had been removed from the bones, and some people have suggested that Homo Antecessor may have practiced cannibalism. Homo Antecessor was between 5'6" to 6 feet tall. Males weighed about 200 pounds. Other anatomical features found in the species include a protruding occipital bun, a low forehead, and a lack of a strong chin. The cranial capacity was about 1,000 cc's. The best preserved fossil and type specimen for Homo Antecessor is a maxilla, that's the upper jaw, of a 10-year-old individual, a juvenile individual from Spain. It is unusual because juveniles are not fully developed. It has been suggested that Homo Antecessor is the last common ancestor before Neanderthals and anatomically modern Homo sapiens diverged. Okay, so this is Atapuerca, and this is the maxilla that was found. So, about 500,000 years ago, Homo ergaster populations throughout Africa were being supplanted by or were evolving into a highly varied group of hominids that began spreading into almost all of Africa's ecological niches. Because they were so variable, a lot of paleoanthropologists have a hard time agreeing what they are. So we generally refer to them as archaic Homo sapiens or Homo Heidelbergensis. This is because they do not yet have the features typical of anatomically modern Homo sapiens. These archaics are also very distinct from the Neanderthals. They often have features that are a mosaic of features between ergaster and anatomically modern Homo sapiens. One very important archaic Homo sapiens or Homo Heidelbergensis specimen is the Mauer jaw. It was found in 1907 in Germany, and it is a lower jaw, mandible. It's dated to be about 500,000 years ago. What are some of these mosaic-like features characteristic of Mauer? It has a very robust, very heavy mandibular body, as you can see right here. It has a low ascending ramus, and it has a receding chin. It also has very small molars, which is more characteristic of modern humans. So it has a lot of features of ergaster, but it also has a modern Homo feature. Another very important specimen that has been found is a Petrolona cranium. Petrolona is in Greece. It was found in 1960. The dating is remarkably uncertain. It's been suggested to be between 700,000 to 100,000 years ago. So a lot of variation in dating that's very unclear. It also displays a mosaic of anatomical features between Homo ergaster and Homo sapiens. For ergaster-like features, it has a very low cranial vault right here. It has a receding forehead. It has very thick cranial bones and a massive supraorbital crest. However, it has some modern Homo sapiens-like features. It has a cranial capacity of 1200 cc's, a supraorbital crest, follow the orbital contours, so instead of having a single bar across, you have two separate crests, and that's also a very modern Homo thing. A third specimen of Homo Heidelbergensis is from Bodo. Bodo is in Ethiopia, and this specimen was found in 1976. It's possibly as old as 600,000 years ago. While the cranium is very robust, the humerus is appreciably smaller than what we see in modern humans, and this suggests that Homo heidelbergensis may exhibit tremendous sexual dimorphism. The cranial vault is very, very thick. The supraorbital ridges, like these, are also very thick. They're arched and they're separated, so they're not a solid bony shelf. Once again, we see the presence of cut marks resembling cut marks that are made by cutting flesh with stone tools. Once again, suggestive that they were practicing cannibalism. And these are some of the examples of the cut marks that are found on these bones. Like Homo ergaster and Homo erectus, archaic Homo sapiens occupied both caves and open air sites. So they weren't restricted to just open air sites, but they inhabited caves as well. Many more cave sites are known for archaics than for erectus and ergaster, but this is probably due to the limited lifespan of caves, and that many of those occupied by ergaster and erectus probably no longer exist. They were probably completely degraded. At most of these Homo sapiens sites, Homo heidelbergensis sites, there's evidence of fire, and concentrations of burnt bones in depressions of 50 to 60 centimeters in diameter have been found at sites in Hungary. And that's one of the oldest sites for Homo heidelbergensis. Some other sites contain clear indications of structures. In Mariendorf, Germany, we see scatters of artifacts and bones surrounded by large quartz blocks. And in Bilsingsleben in Germany, we see 3 concentrations of artifacts, animal bones, and large stones, which may have been used to build walls. These areas, these concentrations, are 2 to 3 meters in diameter, and each of them is associated with a spread of charcoal, which has been interpreted to possibly be a fireplace. Lastly, at Les Lazarettes in France, we see 11 by almost 4 meter concentrations of artifacts and animal bones bounded by large rocks as well as cave walls. This area also has 2 hearths and marine shells and carnivore teeth. So it's a good indication that these are some of the earliest structures that are known, and this is Homo heidelbergensis. These are some sketches of the Bilsingsleben site in Germany, and this is a distribution of some of the key Heidelbergensis sites. We have Mauer up here, Boxgrove, here's Bodo, Kabwe is also a very important one, Petrolona, okay, and so the next species that I want to mention after Heidelbergensis is Homo Neanderthalensis. They are primarily found in Europe and the Middle East, and the first Neanderthal skull that ever was found was at a site known as Engis Cave in Belgium between 1829 and 1830. It was found by M.D. Schmerling, and he found 3 individuals associated with extinct animals. Unfortunately, these skulls were eventually lost. The second find was at a site called Forbes Quarry in Gibraltar in 1848. The skull was found during British construction, and it wasn't recognized as a Neanderthal until decades later. So this is the range of Neanderthal man, much of which it was uninhabitable during the, this is the range of Neanderthal man. This area was the range areas that they probably could not inhabit because, it was way too cold during the ice ages. This is, Siberia. Okay, so but this is where the Neanderthals were occurring. So they left Africa and went east and west. In this area, we really haven't had a tremendous number of studies. So we don't know how far east they go. Okay. The type site for Neanderthals is a place called Feldhofer Cave in Neander Valley in Germany. This is where quarry workers in 1856 found the fossils. There are several expert opinions on the bones. Schaffhausen argued that they were humans who lived in Europe before the Celts. Thomas Huxley, who was known as Darwin's supporter or Darwin's bulldog, said they were a primitive, extinct kind of humans. Others have suggested that it's basically these skulls were individuals who had pathological conditions, so they were pathologically modern humans. Over time, the accumulation of specimens led to the conclusion that they were in fact an extinct kind of human, that Huxley was correct. The name Neanderthal stems from the fact that the Germans called them the Neanderthals, the people of the Neander Valley. It was in 1864 that an Irish anatomist named William King coined the name Homo Neanderthalensis for this extinct human species. And they have many, many distinctive derived features. For the cranium, we have a long, low, wide vault, something called platycephalic. The cranial base is flat. It's not arched. It's very thin-walled cranial bones. They have large brain, 1,520 cc's. This is the first species we've seen that has a cranial capacity larger than the average human. Remember, modern humans today, average cranial capacity is 1,520. When I say they have an average cranial capacity of 1,520, we have individuals, Neanderthals, whose cranial capacity exceeds 2,200. So 1,520 is just the average. It's not the full range. They have an occipital bun. This is like a big bun of bone where you might have a bun, where a librarian might have a bun of hair. They have a rounder occipital profile and longer occipital plane. So the back of their head kind of looks really, really round. They have very large circular brow ridges, but unlike some of the earlier hominids, their brow ridges are actually filled with air. They're not solid. Think about solid milk chocolate bunnies versus hollow milk chocolate bunnies. Their brow ridges, like ours, are not constructed of solid bone. They were in the earlier species, but not in this Neanderthal is the first one where we see that. So they're hollow, and they're separated by a sulcus. So instead of being a single line of bone, we have separate arches. We notice that Neanderthals in general have very large noses. They have pterodont molars where each of the nerves is connected to the nerves in each of the in each aspect, in each of the roots of the molars. They have a retromolar space, so behind your molars you have a big space where there's no teeth. They have a superiliac fossa, an elongated face, maximum cranial breadth, so where their skull is the biggest is at the mid-parietal region. They have really large frontal sinuses, a small mastoid process, that's right here behind your ear. Their incisors exhibit rounded wear on the labial surface in older individuals, and the teeth and jaw are very well suited for generating and withstanding repeated high pressure forces on the front teeth. These large front teeth, the excessive wear on front teeth, we see chipping and pitting on these incisors. These are all behavioral evidence that they were using their teeth to possibly chew on leather. The Neanderthal postcrania, here's some images, and this is what we see with taurodonty, where all the nerves are connected. The postcrania is just as distinctive as the crania in Neanderthals. They have a very heavily built vertebral column. The cervical vertebrae have long, horizontally projecting spinous processes. They have a scapula with sulcus on the dorsal aspect of the axillary border. And this is indicative that their rotator cuff muscles were very well developed. They have a robust humerus with a massive head, also suggesting that they were using tremendous arm strength, and they had lateral bowing of the radius, and this is for better leverage to rotate their arm. The distal phalanx of the thumb is the same length as the proximal phalanx, and the pelvis, you have some dorsally rotated ilia. They have a thin, elongated pubic ramus, suggesting that they have a larger birth canal than modern humans. And it's been suggested that perhaps because they have a larger head size than modern humans and short stature, that they needed a larger birth canal. It's also been suggested that they had a longer gestation. The femurs are massive, and they are cortically thick, cylindrical shafts. And there's no distinct pilaster, and they have a low femoral neck shaft angle. The femoral neck shaft angle is 125 in Neanderthals. It's 135 in anatomically modern Homo sapiens. This is indicative of the fact that there's elevated stress on the hip as individuals were maturing. They have short tibia with a retroverted proximal head, squatting facets on the distal tibia, and large, thick kneecaps. They have a low brachial and crural index, so the ratio of the radius to the humerus and the tibia to femur are very low. They have very large neural canals, equivalent to modern humans, which has indications for their ability to communicate like modern humans. Their muscle and ligament attachment areas are huge, really, really large. And they have the glenoid fossa of their scapula is long, narrow, and shallow. Once again, that's probably for projectile throwing. Overall, I would say that the Neanderthals are much more robust than anatomically modern Homo sapiens. They're powerfully built. Even their ribs are very thick in cross-section. What was the quality of life like for these Neanderthals? Well, we have evidence from a location called Shannon Cave in Iraq. And from this location, from this field site, we have the partial skeletons of more than 8 individuals. And 4 of the individuals were probably deliberately buried. All 8 of the individuals show evidence of trauma. Shannon 3 suffered a rib injury, likely caused by a stabbing. All of their injuries are indicative of the fact that these Neanderthals lived a very rough and a very violent lifestyle. The trauma patterns that we see in these Neanderthals closely follows the same types of trauma patterns that we see in rodeo riders in modern human populations. These Neanderthals lived relatively short lives. Most of them died before the age of 50. Despite the fact that virtually every reasonable complete skeleton of elderly Neanderthals shows evidence of trauma, all of these individuals survived for extended post-traumatic periods, as they showed extensive wound healing with little to no evidence of infection. And this is indicative that there was social care and responsibility to disabled members of the community. Disabled members could still contribute to the group by doing childcare, gathering, maintaining group knowledge, making tools. It's much less work to help someone heal from a broken leg than to abandon them and replace them from scratch, have a child and train it to hunt. This is the Shannon cave. Shannon 4 was believed to be deliberately buried on his left side, his legs drawn up into this fetal position, and his hands placed under his head. Pollen analysis of the soil suggests that he may have been buried with spring flowers, that spring flowers may have been placed on the grave. Some researchers have suggested that this indicates a belief in the afterlife. That's more of conjecture, but it's interesting nonetheless. The Neanderthals exhibit very little evidence of art, of ornamentation, bone work, painting, or sculpture. There are 2 necklaces of drilled animal teeth and flat bones. One's in Moravia in the Czech Republic, and one's in Italy. There's very little bone work, no painting or sculpture. So despite all the technological minimalism exhibited by these Neanderthals, or the cultural minimalism of the Neanderthals, technologically they were advanced over the Acheulean. The technological tool industry used by Neanderthals is known as the Musterion. Archaeological sites from the Musterion are dominated by flake tools. Flakes are struck from the core and used as tools. So initially you have a rock and you take another rock and you bang it into it. That piece that flies off is the flake. The piece you're holding in your hand is the core. Historically, with Homo habilis and Homo erectus and Homo ergaster, they're using the core. All of a sudden, with the Neanderthals, they're using the piece that flakes off, the sharper, smaller piece. This tool industry is called the Musterian tool industry. It's also called the Middle Paleolithic. These are examples of some Middle Paleolithic Musterian tools. So, what about the sites of these Neanderthals? Most sites are in rock shelters or in the mouths of caves. The caves preserve better than open-air sites and are obvious places to look for artifacts, and that may be why most sites are found in these areas. They may not have preferred caves over open-air sites, but it may be easier for us to find information from those sites. None of the Neanderthal cave sites show evidence of any type of structural modification. So they're not building houses per se, they're just living in these caves. Fire. Fire at Kibara Cave in Israel, we see evidence of stacked hearths. These are recurrent intensive fire building hearths over several years. Speech. This is probably one of the most controversial topics in paleoanthropology, whether or not Neanderthals had the capability for human speech. Remember I said that their neural canals were as large as modern humans, which was suggestive that they had some of the physical capabilities for human speech. I'm sorry, I don't remember his name, but Dan Lieberman, argues that Neanderthals lack the speech-producing anatomy necessary for sounds like vowels, for nasal versus non-nasal distinctions, and certain velar consonants. Much of this argument rests on the perceived similarities between the anatomy of Neanderthal supralaryngeal tract and that of chimps and newborn infants. So he reconstructed from La Chapelle aux Saints Neanderthal the supralaryngeal tract, and he found that the neck could not accommodate the vocal apparatus of modern humans, and argued that Neanderthals only had limited sapient quality for speech. These reconstructions attempt to show that Neanderthal neck could not accommodate the vocal apparatus of modern humans, limiting this sapient quality of speech. Okay? Recently, there's been some osteological lines of evidence that contradict this model constructed by Lieberman. The discovery of a Neanderthal hyoid bone from Kibara is one such line of evidence. The hyoid anchors some of the tongue muscles, and the Cabaris specimen is exactly the same as an anatomically modern Homo sapiens. So that's suggestive that Neanderthals were using their tongue in exactly the same way that modern humans do for speech. Richard Kay argued that the hypoglossal canal, which contains nerves controlling the tongue, is also the same for Neanderthals and anatomically moderns. The lump in the throat that we call the Adam's apple is created by the thyroid cartilage, which surrounds the larynx, which is the sound-making organ in your throat. In most mammals, the larynx sits so high. Here's your larynx right here. It sits so high in the throat that it cannot be seen. An animal with a larynx, like a chimpanzee, would find it very difficult, as a result, to produce the range of vowels that are used in human language. Natural selection has caused the larynx to drop in the throat in humans because these changes facilitate language. This compromise, this morphological change, has not been without cost. The larynx sits high in the throat of other animals, much higher up here, about right here, so that other animals can breathe and eat simultaneously. When most animals swallow, the larynx rises up and forms a watertight seal with the entrance to the nasal cavity. Air can pass directly from the nose down to the windpipe. Okay. At the same time that food and water can go around the larynx and into the stomach. Okay. This configuration is found in human infants and enables them to nurse and breathe simultaneously. If you watch a baby suckle, you might be amazed at how long it can drink without coming up for the air. Try it yourself from a bottle perhaps, and you won't last for more than a minute or two. Similarly, when you get a cold and your nose is all stuffed, you find it very hard to breathe and talk simultaneously. Because the mature human larynx is so much lower, it can't form a seal with the nose cavity, and after infancy we must alternate between breathing and drinking. Even worse, as Darwin noted, every single article of food and drink which we swallow has to pass over the orifice for the trachea with some risk of falling into our lungs. As a consequence, thousands of people choke to death every year. So it seems likely that in most mammals, most animals, the geometry of the throat has the optimal design for permitting eating, breathing, at the same time, while the human design represents a compromise between the demands of eating, breathing, and the additional demand of speaking. Directly related to this is cranial base flexion. In most mammals, including human infants, the larynx sits high in the throat, and this allows that simultaneous breathing and eating. Modern humans have highly flexed cranial bases, which forces the larynx down into the neck, and this causes this choking hazard. Neanderthals had much less cranial base flexion, thus a more highly placed larynx. And on that basis, some people have suggested that Neanderthals may have been unable to make crucial sounds. So we kind of have mixed evidence regarding whether or not Neanderthals were capable of human speech, because the anatomical evidence shows a mosaic of features. Some